Okay, so while we're talking Middle Ages, we're going to talk about three nations in a sense starting to form here: England, France, and then Spain. And so we're going to look at how does England become united, and who are the people or some of the kings who will unite England and then make significant political changes. So let's begin in the early England. So, right, for centuries, invaders from all over Europe would come to Britain. In the 800s, the Vikings arrived, and right, they were feared and fierce. So, here are their travels. So, by 800 CE, there's small Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that cover Britain, and we've talked a lot about the feudal system. So, you had these local lords controlling feudal states. But gradually we see the growth of towns and villages, and that would then force the feudal system to change. I think it's always going to be there, but we'll see like Charlemagne influence the growth of kings kind of using the feudal system and connecting then larger territories under their one control. But we're starting to see that kind of breakdown leading to a centralized government. And so, as I mentioned before, the first two countries to do these kinds of things were England and France, and then Spain will follow. Okay, so let's see who are these men to shape this. We'll start with King Alfred the Great. I think only one of two kings of England that get the great term. And so he was one of the only Anglo-Saxon kings to stop the Vikings. And he and his successors were starting to unite then the kingdom of Britain under one government. And so the land of the Angles, England, right, becomes England. And obviously this is not a portrait from the time, but here's a coin of Alfred, and I think it's in the Roman fashion, right? So you can see the evidence, connection, I should say, to the Roman Empire. Okay, so now other people that start to unite is, so in 1016, so notice we've skipped ahead a bit, is King Canute from Denmark. He will come over and conquer England, and he'll start to join the Anglo-Saxons with the Vikings into one group of people. So some of the Vikings had stayed, to farm, and now they're just sort of becoming one group. And so here is his kingdom, coming from Denmark right into England. And then by 1042, King Edward the Confessor would take the throne, and he dies without an heir. And so we start to see then a struggle for the throne. So, in the midst of this struggle, right, we have the Norman conquest, which is one of the defining moments, I think, of English history. So William, the Duke of Normandy, and this is Normandy here in France, he believes that Edward had promised him the throne. And they're, I don't know, cousins or something. And note to self, when you study European history, remember all the monarchs are sort of related in some way, sometimes maybe too close for comfort. And so he was from Normandy, which was a place that had been conquered by the Vikings, and he is looking to expand his control. I think he was the illegitimate son of a king, so maybe looking for some legitimacy. But anyway, he leads this invasion into England. So this is near the spot, not this exact building, but an earlier building right here is where he was born, and this is where he's buried in France. Okay, all right. So, however, he did have a rival in England, Harold Godwinson, who also believes he should be the king and has relation to Edward the First. So that doesn't stop William, the Duke of Normandy. He lands in England, and on October 14th, 1066, it's a handy date to know, is the Battle of Hastings. And so the Normans and the Anglo-Saxons fight in this battle. And so this is going to change history, right? Harold is killed by an arrow right through the eye, and so then William wins and becomes the King of England. How do we know about the Battle of Hastings? Obviously through records, but also through the Bayeux Tapestry, which is kind of cool. So you'll notice there's a link here if you want to pause and click on it to, this will take you to a cool video on YouTube. It's someone has animated the Bayeux Tapestry. It's kind of awesome. It's only 4 minutes. Take a look at it. But it's this embroidered cloth, 230 feet long, and it depicts the events leading up to the Norman conquest of England and then the Battle of Hastings. And so there's like 50 scenes. I mean, it's really cool. So it might be worth your time to click on that link and watch this video. So a lot of the depictions of this time are told through embroidery. Okay, so now our William, Duke of Normandy, now is known as William the Conqueror. And he will take control of England and takes, just 1/5 of English property for himself. And so he grants the lands to the nobles from Normandy who came with him. And some of these men were, the second sons, people who maybe didn't have the estates promised to them in France. And we start to see then the influence of the Normans coming over as the nobility, and then the Anglo-Saxons then start to move down to the lower classes, if you will, or lower men on the totem pole. This I thought was interesting. This is, so these are paintings of William the Conqueror, but the oldest thing I could find is here he is from the Bayeux Tapestry, and this is his armor, and apparently he's lifted up his visor to show that he's alive. So this is interesting. So William wants to have a record of all the lands of England, and this is kind of when we see this type of feudalism then come into England with William the Conqueror. And so he has this huge survey of the land, and this book is to become known as the Domesday Book. And it gives us a lot of information on early England and kind of the feudal structure with the king now, even though we have this class system, right, down to the serfs, but it's, so you have lots of nobles and stuff, or like a greater noble and lower nobles or vassals, and this structure kind of expands. It's still feudal in nature, but covering a large part of territory. And so this is then this type of feudalism then coming into England. Okay, so from William the First on, there's always going to be this battle to maintain control of the throne. And so there also then is the kings of England. Some of them I think probably speak French, right, rather than what we'll know as English. And they have territory then both in France and in England. And then, so notice the dates here. I think this is, his grandson maybe, is Henry II. And he starts to add on to these territories when he married Eleanor of Aquitaine, who had territory there in France. And she was actually the wife of the King of France. And she annulled that marriage and then soon after married Henry II. And she was, I don't know, maybe 10 years younger than Henry, but wait for it, had 8 children with him. So that's pretty unusual. Speaking of unusual, she's unusual. She's quite a powerful woman for this time period. And if you've got time on your hands, I would look her up. She's pretty interesting. And then this is the oldest depiction I could find of Henry II. Apparently he's handing a church to, I don't know, the Pope or something. Here is Eleanor and Henry holding court, and these are their effigies on their tombs. FYI. Okay, so we start to see then added territory then of in France, and this will be important later, of course. Okay, so under Henry II's reign, he starts to strengthen the courts. He would send royal judges around England. They would collect taxes, right? So we're starting to see bureaucracy being built and administration structure coming along. So while we're kind of, Europeans are still woefully behind like what we saw in China or India, but you start to see these as they become more stable, these structures developing. And he also then introduced the use of the jury. And the rulings of the judges become known as common law. And then these are just kind of added to the books, right, throughout history. Another interesting tidbit, I think, of Henry's reign is a conflict with the Archbishop of Canterbury, which was the highest church officer in England. And I think we'll see a running theme of kings kind of battling the church, like who is most powerful. And this is a depiction of Henry appoints his friend Thomas Becket to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, but they start to go at odds with each other. Henry thought he could control him, and what ends up happening is this is a depiction of these knights who snuck in to the cathedral in Canterbury and killed the Archbishop, which was quite scandalous at the time. Okay, so King Henry has a famous son. We talked about him with the Crusades, Richard the Lionhearted. But when Richard died, his younger brother John took the throne. And John's nickname was Bad King John. And so you'll notice, although maybe he was good at one point, because he also has a portrait of him giving a church to somebody. So these are why he was bad, right? And so in 1215, nobles, I think, chased him down into a field and made him sign something that will become known as the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. And so this is a 19th century rendition of what that must have looked like. So the Magna Carta is probably one of the most important documents in English history, and then as Americans, ancestors or descendants of the English, it's important for us too. It starts to guarantee basic political rights. And if you look at that list there, some of these rights should sound familiar to us. And so as it becomes a foundational document for us and the English. And the important thing here is it limits the right of the king. And so our first battle of early modern history is the battle of the church and the kings, and then it becomes a battle of limiting the king. Okay, so Edward the who is then, I don't know, we're moving along here. So we left off with Henry, Bad King John. So now I think he might be the son of John or the grandson of John. He needs to raise taxes to pay for a war. So he summons people together, burgesses, who were wealthy citizens, and knights from every county. So he brought them all over to meet together, and this is going to be what becomes the Parliament. And they meet in 1295, and because it had some commoners, it was called the Model Parliament. And this, eventually then they kind of go out on their own, right? The knights and the burgesses form their own group called the House of Commons, and the nobles and the bishop will form their own assembly called the House of Lords. And to this day, Parliament is made up of these two houses. Okay. And so, as you can imagine, the development of the Parliament, will be now the great battle, I think, between the king and the Parliament of who really controls England.